I think if you mention the name The Night Stalker, most people think you're talking about the serial killer. However, long before Richard Ramirez's 1984 killing spree, there was The Night Stalker, a highly successful TV movie from 1972 that spawned an equally successful sequel in 1973 and two shortly lived TV shows, one in 1974 and again in 2005. Both the TV movies and the original television series starred Darren McGavin as Carl Kolchak, a quick-witted, investigative reporter who has a habit of stumbling upon terrifying adventures that involve monsters ranging from vampires to headless motorcyclists. Kolchak is always dressed in his blue Sunday suit and $2 hat, and he's a very neurotic character that values truth above all else and is willing to risk his life and reputation to find out that truth. He's also willing to get his hands dirty and save the day when the local law enforcement won't acknowledge the fact that the day actually needs saving. He's an underdog, and he seems to never catch a break. Even when he's victorious, it usually comes with a bittersweet cost.
Kill him.
Never. You'll never get away with it.
What's to stop me?
You're gonna stop yourself, Kolchak. Because if you open your mouth, we'll find you, bring you back, use this warrant, and put you away forever.
The first TV movie was called The Night Stalker. It was directed by John Moxey and was written by Richard Matheson. Yeah, that Richard Matheson. It was based on a then unpublished novel by Jeff Rice, and it follows Carl Kolchak as he slowly discovers that the murder spree in Las Vegas is not the work of a serial killer, but a vampire. The Night Stalker is an effectively creepy movie that builds a pretty good mystery that makes the final confrontation between Kolchak and the vampire very exciting. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is when the police discover a body in a sand pit, and they can't figure out how the body got there without leaving any tracks.
Anything?
We found a purse. There's signs of a struggle up here.
But nothing in between. Only our footprints.
What'd he do, throw her?
That moment really pulled me in. This is a great little vampire flick that has a lot of personality, mostly due to Darren McGavin's performance and narration.
Kolchak, now you keep it short.
I was at the hospital yesterday, and a lot of things were happening that you just simply cannot explain away. Sheriff, your own men shot at him, some at point-blank range. How come it didn't even slow him down? How come a man over 70 years old can outrun a police car? How come this same man, when slugged in the head, doesn't even bleed?
The second TV movie, The Night Strangler, was directed by Dan Curtis and written by Jeff Rice and Richard Matheson. It follows much of the same formula as the first movie, this time in Seattle, Washington, and instead of a vampire, there's a strangler using the blood of his victims to stay immortal.
Excuse the clumsiness of the hands, but my wrists are slightly encumbered by your bracelets. Now, this photograph of Dr. Richard Malcolm and the slightly doctored photograph of Dr. Malcolm Richards are identical down to the white scar above the right eyebrow. Huh? Now, this photograph was taken during the Civil War when Dr. Richard Malcolm was a surgeon with the Union Army. The photograph of Dr. Malcolm Richards was taken in 1926. It showed a man in his 40s. Now, how can a man almost 90 look like a man in his 40s?
I'm not fond of this sequel, and that's not because it's a bad movie or anything, but it just doesn't bring anything new to the table. The villain may not be a vampire, but he's using blood to stay young. Yeah, it's pretty close. And it follows the first movie pretty much beat for beat. This is something the director is pretty proud of, and that's good for him. But sequels that are practically remakes of the first movie usually don't sit well with me, although I do have my exceptions. The Night Killers was intended to be the third movie, but was never made. The plot involved Kolchak discovering a plot of aliens and UFOs abducting government officials and replacing them with robots as part of an invasion. On Darren McGavin's website, they criticized the script of this unmade movie, saying it was yet another beat-for-beat remake of the first. I don't really see how. The plot doesn't sound remotely similar, and I kind of wish they made it. But if they did, we might have never gotten a TV series, which is almost like having 20 sequels opposed to just a third movie. Kolchak the Night Stalker is the first TV series spun off the 1972 movie, although it was initially called just The Night Stalker before the title was changed midway through. Darren McGavin reprises his role as Carl Kolchak for this single season of 20 episodes. Each episode involves Kolchak uncovering a mystery of some kind, and it usually involves a monster or paranormal element, and trying to obtain evidence to prove its existence. I personally really like the Monster of the Week nature of the show. I like that each episode stands on its own, and you can watch any episode in any particular order and not feel like you've missed anything. It's very much like The Incredible Hulk or Knight Rider in that way. I love how sleazy the show is, especially in the beginning half of the season. And they don't shy away from violent or dark themes. There's rape, murder, drugs, Satanism, you name it, but still maintains its lighthearted quality due to its characters. The show strikes a real balance with its spooky and comedic elements. One moment it can be very scary, dripping with atmosphere, and the next Carl will be arguing with his boss with the cops throwing around elaborate yet hilarious insults.
Go play with your pimples.
The show can be incredibly cheap, especially with some of its monsters, but I think that adds to the charm. For every bad werewolf makeup effect, or guy in a very silly lizard monster costume, there's at least 9 examples where everything kind of works. For a show made in the 1970s, of course. Darren McGavin really sells this show, almost all on his own. His performance as Carl Kolchak is charming and incredibly funny. I personally love it when Kolchak impersonates people or positions to get into no-go zones, and he comes up with the most elaborate stories and backgrounds.
Sir, where are you going?
Oh, it's perfectly all right, nurse. You see, I'm the official police sketch artist.
Well,
my name is Van Damme, Carl
just
Van Damme.
a moment.
No relationship to Van Gogh, of course. You see, I have no deficiency in the ear department. Captain Jonas cleared it with your boss. All I have to do is go in and talk to Mr. Cahill, and he's going to describe everything to me that he saw.
May I see your credentials?
Will you look at that bone structure? As a matter of fact, look in that direction. Look at that profile. Look at the skin texture. Look at the chiaroscuro, even under these dreadful fluorescent lights. Look at the time. We'll talk about a sitting when I'm finished with Mr. Cahill. You can come to my garret.
Oh, well...
Kolchak is the perfect reluctant hero, who's willing to take matters in his own hands, no matter how gruesome things can get.
White candles, matches, salt, and needle and thread. Now, after you catch the zombie, you pour the salt into his mouth. Then, with the needle and thread, you sew the lips very tightly together.
Tony Vincenzo is one of the very few characters outside of Carl Kolchak himself to migrate from the TV movies to the TV show. He makes the perfect straight man to Darren McGavin's comic. When Kolchak gets in trouble with the law or shady organizations, Vincenzo gets the bulk of the punishment.
I guess we're gonna have to go over this place with a fine-tooth comb.
What do you mean, Captain?
Well, this place, it's old. A lot of fire laws being violated.
Where? What's the matter?
Look, exposed wires.
What's only one wire?
Look here. Papers next to a hot plate.
Oh, well, I could get...
Carl and Tony are constantly bumping heads, but you can tell underneath all that yelling, they're good friends. You may recognize the actor of Tony Vincenzo as the psychiatrist who gives the monologue at the end of Psycho. Other characters include Ron Updike, who hates Kolchak with a passion and is always bumping heads with him.
Maybe you like my second joke better. Your car is parked in my place again. I called a tow truck. They'll be here any minute.
You know, Ron, I thought that you'd do that. I just had a feeling after you told me the other day. Well, so 5 minutes ago, I asked our janitor here, Georgie, to take the keys out of your pocket there and go down and move your car back into your space. Look.
Keep on trucking on.
Emily Coles is Carl's friend, and often covers for him when he's sneaking out or just being mischievous.
Oh, please, Mr. Vincenzo, something has simply got to be done about that elevator.
Tony, here it is, right there. See the amulet. First the dog had it, and now Palmer's wearing it. See right in the picture, see?
I'm not a complainer, you know
See,
that.
devil worshippers make pacts, contracts with the Prince of Darkness.
What's the normal heartbeat?
They achieve great wealth, power, high office, whatever, but they sell their souls to the devil.
Now, how much could it cost? One of these days, someone's heart is just going to give out climbing those stairs.
The devil confers upon them the power to transform themselves.
Now, please, Carl, let me finish, and then you can have your little chat.
One of the best aspects of this show is the rapid-fire dialogue and how naturally everyone plays off of each other.
You're a 20-year veteran, Kolchak. Now, what is the matter with your head?
It's a smear.
You're practically accusing a man of murder. Ryder Bond, almost a god with some of the wealthiest, most powerful people in Chicago.
God, I didn't think about that. Maybe he's starting those fires by hurling thunderbolts.
That is a rotten thing to say. Bond is a consummate artist, a genius.
All right, Ron, fine. Now, this isn't your story. Where's your assigned story? Nobody told you to write up these slanders.
That's right.
Can we please hold this hysteria down to a fever pitch?
We could be crushed like bugs for printing these allegations.
Everyone in Kolchak's world has some sort of quirk, and there's some pretty great interactions between Carl and anyone he encounters. From the police chief who goes on about transparency with the press but never really says anything, to the biology teacher who likes to spend his lunches reading travel brochures. There's not a dull moment in any episode. The show's list of guest stars are full of a lot of interesting character actors and bigger names of television at the time that'll make you go, oh, I recognize that guy. The show features such talent as... I'm going to take a moment and talk about my favorite episodes. I like all 20 of them. There's not a single one I would say is bad or weak, but these are my personal favorites and recommendations for newcomers. The Vampire is my favorite episode of the entire series. It acts as sort of a sequel to the original film. It revolves around a woman who's turned into a vampire and becomes a prostitute to lure men to their death. And of course, Carl's the only one who has figured this out. And when he takes matters into his own hands, it makes the entire episode. The climax with the vampire trumps the one from the original by a long shot. I can't recommend this one enough. The werewolf is often considered to be the worst episode of the series. I can't help but love it. While on a yacht, Kolchak discovers that there's a werewolf on board, killing off passengers. Since the staff won't admit that there's an emergency, Kolchak steals the captain's silver buttons to make silver shotgun shells and go after the werewolf himself. I think the reason why people dislike this episode so much is because how cheap the werewolf looks, but I like it. I think it adds charm. Horror in the Heights is a really creepy episode. It's about a creature that can disguise himself as its victims' loved ones. There's parts of it that remind me of the movie It Follows, and the only one besides Kolchak who knows about this monster tries to repel it by using swastikas, because in his culture, they're not the symbol of hate that we know it as. And he's doing this in a Jewish neighborhood. Firefall is a personal favorite of mine. It oddly combines a lot of elements that could make episodes all on their own. There's a mystery about people bursting into flames with no explanation as to why, a ghost trying to take over a person's body, if you sleep you die trope, evil doppelgangers, and strangely it ties together pretty well. I love the nightly murders. There's something about it that just reminds me of Scooby-Doo. It's about a haunted suit of armor that's killing people. It's so much fun. Chopper was written by Robert Zemeckis and is about a headless motorcyclist chopping off the heads of the gang that killed him back in the 50s. It's goofy, and the way they made the motorcyclist look headless is pretty cheap. But I really like the idea of the episode, and it really stands out as a personal favorite. I know when something has only one season, most people assume the show was bad, or that it was cancelled. And that's true that the show received poor ratings at the time, but the real reason for the show's short run was Darren McGavin was growing frustrated with some behind-the-scenes stuff. He was overworked and took on many of the show's production responsibilities that he was ultimately uncredited for. He was also tired of the Monster of the Week style scripts and asked for his contract to be ended. The Night Stalker and the Night Strangler have both been released on a double feature DVD, but this has been out of print for some time, and at the point of this recording, the new rights holders have not made any attempts to re-release. I'll update in the comment section and description if and when this set comes back into print. The double feature comes with 2 interviews with Dan Curtis as an extra. There have been 2 releases of the TV series on DVD. The initial release has gone out of print, but in my opinion the 3-disc set was pretty poor in comparison to the second release with its easily scratched double-sided discs. I would highly recommend the second release with its 5 single-sided discs and slim packaging. Unfortunately, there are no extras on both releases. The picture quality is okay considering the time period they were made in, but they're pretty poor compared to the transfers that the movies had. The TV show is on Netflix from time to time, and there seems to always be someone uploading episodes onto YouTube, so there's ways to watch it through streaming and such. I really hope that one day these movies, as well as the TV series, get a proper restoration on Blu-ray. Kolchak is often described as the inspiration for the X-Files. Chris Carter is a big fan of the Night Stalker, and it's said in the Season 5 episode Travelers that Darren McGavin was asked to reprise his role of Kolchak, but declined, and the character's name was changed to Arthur Dales.
Do you know what an X-File is?
It's an unsolved case.
No, it's a case that's been designated unsolved.
Fans of Kolchak were extremely excited for a Season 10 episode called Mulder and Scully Meet the Were-Monster that appeared to have Kolchak in it in a teaser, but it ends up it just was a character dressed as Kolchak as a homage.
I just want this madness to end.
But you're not thinking of doing anything crazy, are you?
No. I'm just gonna kill you. You ready? No, not the gun, you fool!
In 2005, the series was remade under the title Night Stalker. It aired on ABC and it starred Stuart Townsend as Carl Kolchak, and was cancelled after only 6 episodes, leaving the remaining 4 to be viewed only on iTunes and DVD. This show was my introduction to Kolchak, and I would have never found the original series without it. I recall liking the show back then, but after seeing the original I found myself thinking it was a poor remake. And while I liked it when I first saw it, upon revisiting it for this review, I found it to be a subpar show in general. There are some things I liked about the show. For one, I liked the idea of a bigger picture going on, and each episode being a small piece of a puzzle.
It's my wife. Look at her left hand.
What is it?
I don't know, but she didn't have it before she died. It's the same marks here in Seattle, and again in Sacramento, and again and again. Something terrible is happening. No one sees it because no one wants to.
The quote-unquote creepy scenes I think are handled decently well, and I like the concept of Carl Kolchak having a past and a motivation outside of his search for the truth. However, I felt in execution it was handled pretty poorly. Trying to find your wife's killer as an overstretching story arc is the plot of many TV shows, from The Fugitive to Monk. Plus, the fact that Kolchak has a wife makes it pretty clear that this is not the Kolchak we know and love.
Me married? That's ridiculous.
He's rich, and also at times, he suppresses the truth.
How long would I last in the job if I wrote what I believed? How long would you?
The public has a right to know.
The public? The public doesn't want to know.
And a side note, whose idea was it to have the reminder of this tragic event in Kolchak's past to be a Gumby doll? Everyone's reaction to this is laughter.
Gumby do something to piss you off?
That squares my breasts.
I mean, if the show didn't take itself so seriously, maybe this could have worked. I guess that's my main complaint with the show. It's not self-aware at all. And that's an issue when it takes itself so seriously that it becomes corny. And I know the old show was corny too, but the last thing that could be said about the original series is that it took itself seriously, let alone too seriously. And honestly, it feels like an X-Files ripoff rather than a Night Stalker remake, complete with a male believer and female skeptic team. Matter of fact, with each episode I felt like, oh, I've seen this before in the X-Files. Stuart Townsend makes a poor Kolchak in my opinion. He lacks the charisma needed for the role, and I personally think he's too young to take seriously. I would describe his performance as pretty flat, but I think that could be cropped up to that he's just not right for the role. There's only 2 characters I really like in this show, and one of them's Tony Vincenzo, but it's hard to screw that kind of character up. The other character I like is Perry Reed, who is the Scully to Kolchak's Mulder. She's cute and also believable as an investigative reporter. and most of the time she delivers a decent performance. In the pilot episode, they have this really weird effect to put Darren McGavin into the episode. Normally I'd appreciate the attempt, honoring the show's roots and all, but the fact that the show seemingly is Night Stalker in name only makes the Easter egg just distracting. Like if you had no idea this was a remake, and you saw this weird effect to put this random guy into a scene, all your attention will be drawn towards that. It's pretty bad. Overall, I think the 2005 show is pretty forgettable, but I don't really blame them for the changes they made. I can totally see from a marketing perspective why they would make some of these changes, but at the end of the day, in my opinion, it's pretty inferior to its 1970s counterparts. Back in 2012, Disney announced a film adaptation of Kolchak, with Johnny Depp starring and Edgar Wright directing. And after all these years, I doubt this will ever happen. But if it does, I have some apprehension of a Kolchak movie being a big budget Disney vehicle for Depp. I don't think Depp is right for the role. I think someone like Gary Oldman would be a far better choice. We'll see what happens, if it happens at all. With all this talk of remakes, let's talk about my dream remake. Personally, I feel the best and most logical choice for Carl Kolchak is Bryan Cranston. I think he's perfect for the role. He has proven himself to be both a great dramatic and comedic actor with an amazing amount of range. I think he could bring to life the charisma that Darren McGavin brought to the role without resorting to doing an impression of him. I would like my remake to be a 10 to 15 episode series either on Netflix or some cable channel, with each season having a different overstretching story arc. Season 1 would be an adaptation of The Night Stalker and would cover the story of the first movie between standard Monster of the Week episodes. Season 2 would be an adaptation of The Night Strangler and would bear some similarities to the second movie but would stray away a little bit more from the source material to avoid being repetitive. And the third season would cover the events of the unproduced third movie under the title Night Killers, with Kolchak uncovering the existence of an alien invasion while fighting his weekly monsters. I would love to see a fun and scary show set in the 70s or the 80s that really respects its origins, but does its own thing too. Of course, none of this will ever happen no matter how much I want it, but it's fun to think about and I thought I'd share. Outside of the movies and TV shows, Kolchak currently lives on in the form of comics and novels that are at this moment being released by Moonstone Books. I personally have not read any of these, but I plan to. I hear they're pretty good, and they look like they're worth owning by the beautiful covers alone. There's one where Kolchak teams up with Sherlock Holmes, and judging by the cover, it looks like they modeled Holmes after Jeremy Brett, my favorite Sherlock actor. In conclusion, I really enjoy Kolchak the Night Stalker. It's a great series of movies and episodes that are fun, spooky, and though I never grew up with the show, it feels very nostalgic, like something I would have loved when I was a kid. I owe a lot of what I love about this show to Darren McGavin. He really makes every moment he's on screen. I really hope you take the time to check out the things I talked about in this video. I really think the show deserves more recognition than it currently gets. I'm always surprised how many people just shriek about how much of a crime it was that Firefly only had one season, while in my eyes it was just another space opera. It fades away with other shortly lived science fiction shows with interesting concepts. And yet I don't hear many people say the same for Kolchak, what I feel was pretty original for the time. But those 2 movies and 20 episodes have lived on through its fans for over 40 years. And has reached a second life through home video. Well, that's it for now. I'm Joseph Russitano, also known as Joey Hollywood, and I really hope you check out the show and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll see you next time in whatever video that might be.
May I introduce myself? My name is Kolchak of the Daily Chronicle.
Kolchak reports the bizarre, the supernatural, the unexplainable.
You again in another crazy story.
This nut thinks he is a vampire.
You know what I call that? Irresponsible yellow journalism.
He has killed 4, maybe 5 women.
I saw that so-called super killer wipe up the streets with your so-called police force.
They don't want any help from amateur bloodhounds like you.
I've been a reporter for 22 years. I've been a police officer for 30. Well, then why don't you retire?
Each man in the field is to be issued one of these and one of these.
Are you suggesting that we pound one of these into Skorzeny's chest?
No, into his heart.
Darren McGavin, the Night Stalker.